In 1997, Nintendo did something that sounds completely out of character for them today. Nintendo sold their own official rewritable multi-game flash cart for the Super Famicom, and a few years later, one for the Game Boy. Exclusive to Japan, the cartridge and service were simply named Nintendo Power, not to be confused with the magazine. Both Super Famicom and Game Boy Nintendo Power cartridges were capable of holding up to 7 games at a time, allowed users to write both old and newly released titles onto them, and did so for less than the cost of a regular cartridge. So how did Nintendo Power work, and more importantly, why did Nintendo even do this? In today's video, we're going to take a look at the time Nintendo sold their own flash carts and essentially ran a ROM site. This is the story of the other Nintendo Power. On September 26, 1997, Nintendo sent out a press release touting the launch of Nintendo Power in partnership with Lawson, one of the largest convenience store chains in Japan. The announcement highlighted that this would be a way for consumers to purchase classic and new titles at cheaper prices by simply purchasing games at a Lawson's in-store kiosk and copying those games to their cartridge. Retailers would also benefit by not having to worry about managing a stock of physical games. However, there's a line in a more detailed corporate document that gives us one of the biggest reasons why Nintendo did this. This will solve the second-hand market problem. Developers and game publishers were unhappy about stores selling used games, as they, of course, wouldn't get anything from those second-hand sales. In fact, in 1999, 6 developers were able to get Japan's Osaka's district court to ban a video game store franchise named ACT from selling used games. Thankfully, the Osaka High Court overturned this ruling in 2001. But Nintendo Power launched 2 years before the ban, and this will solve the second-hand market problem, was Nintendo basically telling third-party companies that there was a big financial incentive to add their games to the Nintendo Power service, and third-party developers took the bait. After a limited test run in Tokyo that began on September 30th, 1997, the Super Famicom version of Nintendo Power had its nationwide release on November 1st, 1997, and by the end of the year, Nintendo Power was in 4,000 Lawson stores. Nintendo Power launched in September with 14 first-party Nintendo titles, including SimCity, F-Zero, and Earthbound. There were also 20 third-party titles at launch, such as Rockman X, Contra 3 The Alien Wars, and Street Fighter II Turbo Hyper Fighting. By the end of 1997, over 100 titles were available for purchase through Nintendo Power. Blank Super Famicom Nintendo Power cartridges could be purchased at Lawson for 3,980 yen, which was about $50 US. Older games would sell for 1,000 to 1,050 yen, and newer games from 2,000 to 3,000 yen, though I only found one 3,000 yen game, Wizardry 123 Story of Lilligambit. Wizardry 123 Story of Lilligambit. The Game Boy version of Nintendo Power was slated to launch on November 1st, 1999, but it was delayed to March 1st, 2000 because of a 7.7 earthquake that hit Taiwan in September. This halted production as the cartridges were supposed to be manufactured there. The Game Boy Nintendo Power cartridge cost 2,500 yen, and at launch, Game Boy games were generally priced at 800 yen for older titles and up to 1,000 yen for newer releases. But later on, some Game Boy titles, such as Karamucho wa Osawagi Owari, I'm very sorry about that pronunciation, could cost 1,500 to 2,000 yen. The Game Boy cartridge could be pre-ordered directly from Nintendo, with Super Mario Land 3 preloaded onto it at no additional cost. Now, both the Super Famicom and Game Boy Nintendo Power cartridges could hold up to 7 games and 16 game saves for titles that supported saving via SRAM. However, as we'll see in a bit, the actual number of games and saves that would fit onto your cartridge depended solely on the size of the games and game saves you put on it. To their credit, as long as you were okay with deleting games off your cartridge to make room for new ones, Nintendo mostly followed through on their promise of Nintendo Power being a more affordable way to purchase games. To put into context the kind of savings that Nintendo Power could get you, let's look at Fire Emblem Thracia 776. This game was first released to Nintendo Power for 2,500 yen and remained exclusive to Nintendo Power for several months. When the physical release hit store shelves in January of 2000, it retailed for 5,200 yen, over double what it would cost you to purchase it for Nintendo Power. Clearly, Nintendo Power had value for consumers as well as game publishers and developers. But purchasing and managing your Nintendo Power games wasn't quite as simple and convenient as Nintendo made it seem. Purchasing Nintendo Power games required several steps. If you needed a cartridge, you'd purchase one from a clerk at the Lawson's counter. From Loppy's touchscreen menu, you'd select Nintendo Game Rewrite, insert your flash card into the slot, and either enter the product code for the game you wanted, or, if you didn't have it, find the game's product code through the menu system. Loppy's screen would show you how much memory each game required, and if you didn't have enough memory, you could delete games right there from the Loppy kiosk. Once you selected the games you wanted, the Loppy terminal would print out a form that you'd give to the clerk along with your cartridge and payment. The clerk would then write the purchased games to the cartridge using what was called the Game Writer and the Game Terminal. These were originally named GK Writer and GK Terminal in reference to the service's pre-launch name of Game Kiosk. The terminal is a Windows 95 computer with a 10.4-inch LCD display and a port for connecting the Game Writer. The Game Writer had an 8-speed CD-ROM drive to read specially protected discs that stored the game ROMs. A small 2-line LCD display was also on the Game Writer and a slot for the cartridges. For another 30 yen, you could buy a how-to-play sheet that served as the instruction manual. These seem to have been 1 to 2 pages long and could be downloaded for free as a PDF from Nintendo's website. Nintendo also sold a big Nintendo Power How to Play book that had instructions for the first 103 games released on the service. This book was priced at 380 yen and included some general information on the Nintendo Power service as well. Nintendo eventually stopped using CDs to store the ROMs and instead had the Game Writer download the games from a server. According to Nintendo's website in 1998, the game writing process only took up to 3 minutes. Using Nintendo Power sounds pretty simple, right? Well, things do get a bit more complicated once you have to deal with managing the number of games you want to buy, their size, and how much memory you have left on your cartridge. As I mentioned earlier, each cartridge could potentially have up to 7 games written to it, hence the 7 squares on the cartridge labels. These squares aren't buttons and are just numbers printed on the label. Nintendo included a blank sticker sheet that customers could use to label which game was in each slot. The Nintendo Power Book also had label stickers with artwork on them for the games covered inside the book. Nintendo divided the Super Famicom and Game Boy cartridge flash memory for games into 8 F blocks, with one of those blocks being reserved for the menu system software. This leaves you 7 blocks for games. For the Super Famicom, each of the 8 blocks has a storage capacity of 4 megabits, meaning that the entire cartridge can store up to 32 megabits of data. The Game Boy cartridge had a total flash memory capacity of 8 megabits split across 8 1-megabit blocks. Again, pretty simple, except that many games were too large to fit on one block of memory, and the required number of blocks was rounded up based on how many megabits the game took up. So for example, if you wanted to buy the 10 megabit Final Fight 2 for the Super Famicom, it would take up 3 F blocks of memory, even though 3 blocks totals 12 megabits. Let's say you also decided to buy the 3-block Rockman X and the 1-block Dr. Mario to completely fill up your cart. You can see how quickly 7 games can turn into just a few. Now, let's say that the following month you want to purchase the 5-block Street Fighter II Turbo. Your cartridge is completely full, and the only combination of games that you can delete to free up enough blocks is Final Fight 2 and Rockman X. Your 7-game cartridge has now turned into a 2-game cartridge. And if you wanted to have Final Fight 2 and Rockman written back onto your cart, you would need to buy them again. As from my research, it looks like Nintendo did not provide a way to reload previous purchases. But even if Nintendo had let you rewrite previous games that you bought, it'd be pretty inconvenient as you would need to go back to Lawson's to have it done anyway. Nintendo did have a list of all available Nintendo Power games, their cost, as well as F and B block requirements on their Japanese website. So as long as you had internet access, you could at least make your game management decisions from home. Powering up a Game Boy or Super Famicom with a Nintendo Power cartridge would bring up a menu where you selected which game you wanted to play and also showed you how many F and B blocks were used by each game that was on the cartridge. Some games, like the previously mentioned Fire Emblem Thracia 776, actually used up all 8 blocks and would overwrite the menu software and simply start up like if it was a regular cartridge. This meant that if you wanted to keep Fire Emblem Thracia 776 on your Nintendo Power cartridge, not only would you not be able to add any more games to it, but it would cost you a total of 6,480 yen. That would be 1,280 more than buying the 5,200 yen physical release. So if you were the kind of gamer that liked replaying games, then Nintendo Power probably wasn't for you, as it could potentially be more expensive than buying standalone games. I mentioned Fire Emblem Thracia 776 was originally exclusive to Nintendo Power, but it wasn't alone. Several games started life on Nintendo Power and made it to physical releases, while others like Ring ni Kakero were only available on Nintendo Power. Some games like Super Famicom Wars started on Nintendo's Japan-exclusive Satellaview satellite service, but then made their way onto Nintendo Power without ever getting a physical release. Although a wide variety of games were released on Nintendo Power, you won't find any games that required special enhancement chips like the Super FX chip, as those chips weren't included on the Nintendo Power cartridges. Speaking of special chips, both the Game Boy and Super Famicom cartridges have a Mega Chips chip, which handled communicating with the Loppy kiosk and Game Writer device. By 1999, Nintendo Power was available in 7,000 Lawson stores, but due to continually decreasing demand, Nintendo ended the Lawson store version of the service on August 31st, 2002. Nintendo Power owners were able to continue purchasing games directly through Nintendo by printing out and mailing in a specific form found on Nintendo's website along with their cartridge. The form allowed customers to choose which games they wanted written to their cartridge from a list and included a space for customers to specify any games they wanted deleted from their cart. The form would then calculate the memory blocks needed for the purchase as well as the cost. Customers would pay via cash on delivery when their cartridge was returned and were also responsible for the cost of shipping. The Nintendo Power service as a whole was finally completely discontinued on February 28, 2007, just 7 months shy of its 10-year anniversary. What started off as a way for Nintendo and its partners to squeeze a bit more revenue out of the aging Super Famicom hardware ended up lasting long enough to be active at the same time the GameCube launched in 2001. Today, you can find Nintendo Power cartridges on sites like eBay, but the prices are kind of all over the place as far as their range. If you want to add games to a Nintendo Power cartridge today, the modding community have figured out ways of doing so. I should note that Nintendo Power wasn't even Nintendo's first foray into selling games on rewritable media, as they had a similar service for the Famicom Disk System with 1986's Disk Writer kiosks. In the financial statements I found from the time, Nintendo included Nintendo Power sales as part of Game Boy and Super Famicom sales numbers, making it difficult to gauge how successful Nintendo Power really was. It's, of course, highly unlikely we'll ever see a flash cart from Nintendo again, but given Nintendo's current stance on ROM sites and flash carts, it's a bit mind-blowing, to me at least, to think that at one point in time, Nintendo was selling and making their own flash carts and, for all intents and purposes, running a ROM site themselves. Wizardry 123 Story of Lila. Wizardry 123 Story of Lila. Excuse me. Actually, this is perfect. This is Stika. He's a big Wizardry fanboy. If anybody knows how to pronounce this, he will. Hey, Stika, this is great timing. In Wizardry 123, how do you pronounce Liligamen?
Wait, where did you learn to pronounce it like that? You dense motherfucker, it's called Lilgamen.
Okay. Thanks so much for making it to the end of the video. I put out a deep dive documentary about the Game Boy's development last month, so if you haven't watched it yet, please consider checking it out. A big thank you to my Patreon members. Your support is, as always, greatly appreciated. If you'd like to support the channel monetarily, you can do so at patreon.com/wrestlingwithgaming. I want to thank Wizardry fanboy Stika for his cameo in this video. Stika has a great retro gaming focused channel himself. I highly recommend it, especially if you like finding out about games you've never heard of or new games for older systems, though he covers a ton of different topics. Finally, if you'd like to keep up with what's happening on the channel, you can follow me on Twitter at WrestlesGaming. I usually post work-in-progress renders, sometimes a clip or two there, but most of all, thank you for watching.